Let's just get to back to the office here, which seemed to be moving along at least steady pace and expectations by mid-January for a lot of companies to bring a lot of workers back. Has that been set back by Omicron?
Good morning. Yes, it certainly has. Omicron certainly has delayed the return to office. And the return to office, throughout the pandemic has been somewhat of a gamble. Every time a company sets a date, it seems that it gets moved back. And that's a function of the virus, not anything else, and obviously concerns around the spread. So the hope is, and I think the science is starting to prove that Omicron is a blip in that return to office cycle. And once this passes, which is hopefully going to be quickly, we should be back on track.
Yeah. What does back on track actually mean, given, again, the almost 2 years that we've had here of sort of starting and stopping and a lot of workers who at least seem reluctant to return overall?
Again, highly dependent on the virus and if there's another variant after this. But let's assume that we sort of go back to the pre-Omicron days. Then many companies were sort of planning to return early in 22. The milestones on the calendar sort of dictate the return to office. So first, you'll recall, there were many deadlines, but the one before the one that was January 22 was, of course, after Labor Day, and that got delayed because of Delta. So it's very hard to tell, but assuming we go back to what was sort of the atmosphere or the environment prior to Omicron, I think we could start to see a lot of companies returning to office late in the first quarter, early in the second, sort of getting beyond Omicron, which by the current estimates, we ought to have the worst of behind us by the end of February.
Gil, we started this conversation talking about, or started this block, I should say, talking about Manhattan and New York City specifically. But given all the different U.S. markets that Colliers operates in, when you look across the country right now, where do you see the greatest opportunities in 2022 from a commercial real estate perspective?
Yes, Manhattan is tough, right? Just like San Francisco. Obviously, you all know this better than I, but it's a city that requires commuting, which brings a heightened sense of concern by folks returning because they've got to get on that subway or they've got to get on the bus and so forth. And there's heightened chance of spread in those environments, perhaps more so than when you're actually in the office. So dense cities that require a commute are having a tougher time than other cities and other suburban areas. Suburban has become very popular from an office standpoint. You hear about hub and spoke offices that are no longer requiring everybody to come to one location or to come to a downtown. It's a function of the virus, but also a function of the way people now want to work. And so pretty much anywhere where there's a lesser commute or you're in a suburban area or a less dense area, that's from an office standpoint where folks are most likely to return. And in terms of opportunity, if you're an investor, then obviously those markets follow suit. It's not to say that there isn't interest again, certainly pre-Omicron. If you go back a month or so, there was certainly interest again in high-rise office towers in central business districts. It's not completely dead, but a lot of the activity was outside of those areas.
Though I know there has not been that many transactions, but those in New York, for example, for Class A buildings seem to be maintaining value, which, again, are you surprised by that?
Certainly a little bit surprised, right? But it does speak to the resilience of those assets and also, the fact that investors are looking beyond the pandemic. Perhaps that's bold because it's really not a clear pathway at the moment. Every time it clears, it seems to cloud. But I think that investors are taking, just like in the stock market, are taking a long-term view. We will eventually beat this pandemic. And once we do, then those offices have value. They may be used a little bit differently than they were historically, but nevertheless, those assets have value. It's where people come to work.